Welcome back to DSR. We're returning to Valda's Spire of Secrets, but this is going to be the Gunslinger class, which doesn't have a title of a player pack. So there's player pack 1, the Gunslinger class, and then player pack 2. So this is the Gunslinger class pack. I feel like that's a misnomer, though, because it contains a lot more than just the class. And that's true of all of these, the class packs that they put on D&D Beyond. So it's not unique to Valda's, right? It's just the way D&D Beyond decided to do it, which I think is kind of strange, a little bit confusing. All right, so this is going to be a subclass for the Gunslinger from Valda Spire of Secrets for the Gunslinger pack. This is going to be the Spellslinger Gunslinger subclass. I decided to do this one first from this pack because I love Gishes, and this one is a 1/3 spellcaster, so I just love it. On the left, I've got the page up for the Gunslinger base class. On the right, I've got the subclass. I find that when we are adding subclasses or covering subclasses for new base classes created by a partner, it's good to have the base class also showing at the same time so I can refer to those features, and it's a little easier to digest for people who are not as familiar with that new base class. All right, so the Spellslinger. Complement your gunslinging with Arcana. Magic and guns aren't so different. Arcane power is like gunpowder. A spell is like a bullet, and you are like a gun, directing your spells with precision at unfortunate targets. Spellslingers mix the disciplines of gunplay and spellcasting, sometimes loading arcane charges with your shots and firing bullets enhanced with lightning, frost, or flame. Okay, I mean, I think this is a very popular trope. I think it's one that sounds fun. I know that people have played other classes this way, like reflavored other classes and subclasses this way just to make them play this kind of a fantasy. And so it's cool to actually have the mechanics for this kind of a fantasy directly implemented. So it's not just reflavoring. Like I've seen people do it with wizards and other classes. I've seen somebody do it with a cleric where they reflavored a cleric as a gunslinger. Okay. So it's a cool idea. All right. At level 3, we get spellcasting. You complement your bullets with the ability to cast spells. It is, I'm not going to read through all of it because it's like all the standard boilerplate for a 1/3 spellcaster. So you're going to use the wizard spell list. You start off with 2 cantrips. You get another cantrip at level 10. You have the standard amount of spell slots. You prepare spell slots, prepare spells the same way, which is you prepare them and you can only swap one when you gain a level in this class. So it's one of the most restrictive spell changes, changing prepared spells, classes or subclasses. Your spellcasting ability is intelligence for your wizard spells, and your spellcasting focus is an arcane focus, or you can also use a ranged weapon as a spellcasting focus for your wizard spells, which is the same thing that the artillerist artificer gets. They can use their ranged weapons as a spellcasting focus too, which is a cool change that actually has some interesting nuance and more impact than you might expect. It allows you to use some spells better with fewer hands than you would otherwise think, like True Strike. So that's cool. You get the standard spell progression for a 1/3 spellcaster. And then also at level 3, we get this feature called Bang, You're Dead. You can use magic in place of guns. So you have a feature called Finger Guns, and you learn the Finger Guns cantrip, which is a new spell introduced in this one. And I already covered the spells, all 9 spells from the Gunslinger class pack. So you can, if you didn't see that, you can go watch that video for how Finger Guns works. One of the interesting things about Finger Guns is that it turns your finger into a ranged weapon, which, Finger Guns, that makes sense. But it doesn't add your spellcasting ability modifier to the damage you deal with it. So it's always just 2d6 damage. That's it. Never increases. And so this next feature is a little bit interesting. It says Arcane Shot. When you hit a target with a Finger Guns attack, you can expend 1 risk die as a bonus action and add it to the damage roll. So I'll cover what the risk die is in a sec, but I was expecting this to say you can add your spellcasting ability modifier to the damage of Finger Guns. Finger Guns, because it turns your finger into a weapon or your hand into a weapon, if you have extra attack, you can make extra attacks with it, because the Finger Guns cantrip is itself not an attack. What it is a buff. It's a 1-minute buff, no concentration. You cast it on yourself, and then your fingers are guns. So then you can use and it's just a weapon. So you can just use it with extra attack and things like that. So it's interesting that you still don't get to add your spellcasting ability modifier to the damage of Finger Guns. And instead what they did was you can expend a risk die as a bonus action to add it to the damage roll. All right, so this is going to take your bonus action and a risk die. So risk die are like superiority dice from Battle Master, right? So over here in the Gunslinger base class on the left, you can see there's the class features table and you see risk die listed right there, it puts it in one column, whereas the Battlemaster, well, the Battlemaster doesn't have a table for the Battlemaster class. But they actually kind of split it out. So it's a little bit confusing here. But what they're saying is, like at level 2, you have 4 risk die, and they're each a D8. So you get the same size of die and the same number of dice as a Battlemaster. The base class gets that as the base class, which is the same as the number of Battlemaster's superiority dice and the same die size. The only difference is you get the number of dice 1 level sooner, but the dice size changes at the same levels. Yeah, so it's very, very, very close to the Battlemaster maneuvers, and it functions the same as Battlemaster maneuvers. The base class, you get like 6 maneuvers, and you learn all 6. You don't have to like learn them or choose which ones. There's just 6, and you always know them all. So that's one other difference there than the Battlemaster maneuvers. But these come back on a short rest. So at level 3, which is what you'd have to be to gain the Spellslinger subclass, you're going to have 4 D8 sized risk dice per short rest, and you could expend those to do this, to increase the damage by a D8 to your finger guns. That's a pretty big price to pay, because those other maneuvers that you have for your risk dice are actually pretty powerful. I would not waste those on this. The only time I might spend one of those on this, I don't know if I would. I mean, I was going to say a critical hit, but there are other maneuvers that you have access to that can do those kinds of things, that can just add damage to an attack. So this is taking your bonus action and a risk die. I don't think this is I don't think this is well thought out, I guess, is the way I'd put it. Or maybe it's like a different incarnation, like they planned it one way and then changed some other things and didn't, missed coming back and updating this. Yeah, I think this one probably should have just been clean and simple. Just say you add your spellcasting ability modifier to the damage you deal with finger guns. That would have brought it in line with, it would have been slightly better than other weapons you could just get access to. Because now it's a 2d6 plus your ability score modifier damage weapon. And most weapons, like no ranged weapons, have a 2d6, unless you're talking about some of the weapons that they add in this game, some of the firearms they add in this Gunslinger pack. But none of them are, I think they cap out at like, is it 2d8? None of them are dramatically, that powerful. And finger guns would be slightly better than like a heavy crossbow, but less good than some of those other firearms, and this is one of your main subclass features. So I think that would have been okay. Like, it's a subclass feature. Like, if everyone could just do that, then that would be too strong. And if this is your whole subclass, like, or your, the main core theme of your subclass, I think that would have been okay. So that one's odd. Yeah, and I'm not sure that I would use that, and I probably wouldn't use finger guns either, right? Just stick with a pistol or whatever weapons you have, because those are going to be, whatever the damage dice is plus your ability score modifier. Yeah, not having the ability score modifier on finger guns is a big detriment. Then you get at level 6 Spellshot. When you take the attack action on your turn, you can replace one of the attacks with the casting of one of your wizard cantrips that has a casting time of an action. Yeah. So this is, the Gish extra attack, which is cool. It does specify that it has to be a wizard cantrip, so it's not any cantrip that it has to be a cantrip that you got from this class, or if you multi-classed a wizard, that would count as well. Or if you have something, like take a dragon mark that adds a cantrip to your spell list. I don't think any of the dragon marks add cantrips to your spell list, though. They only add level 1 to 5 spells to your spell list. So yeah, it'd have to be something that says it adds the cantrip to your spell list, not that you just learn the cantrip. That wouldn't work. But this is pretty good, because you could then, make range attacks with your pistols, replace one of those attacks with finger guns, and then it'd still be one attack with your finger guns. It wouldn't be multiple attacks with your finger guns. So I don't know that you'd come out ahead doing that. And there aren't any like blade equivalent cantrips yet that I've seen. Like, maybe there are in the Valda's Spire Secrets, whole book, because these are just a subset of that book. Even all 3 of these packs together don't even come close to adding up to the whole book. It's, I don't know, 10% of the content from the whole book. Like, that book has like 20 or something classes that it adds to the game, and subclasses for each of those, and subclasses for other, for every other base class in the game. That whole book has a ton of content, and these 3 player packs are maybe 10% of that. I don't even know. That might be overstated. I'm just guessing. Anyway, so there, at least for what I have covered so far, there are no blade equivalent cantrips for ranged attacks. They're all melee attacks only. And you could do this with a melee attack, but you're a gunslinger, and the gunslingers are only really good at range attacking with ranged weapons at range. So this one's a little bit awkward. I mean, you could replace one of your range attacks with an attack with finger guns, which at level 6 is probably not good because it's going to do, finger guns never scales up in damage. It's always just 2d6. So Firebolt would do 2d10. So you'd be better off replacing one attack with a Firebolt instead of a finger guns. I mean, you couldn't even do that anyway. I mean, I guess you could. You could cast finger guns. Finger guns doesn't make an attack when you cast it. It just is a buff. You cast it and it buffs you, and it's a bonus action cast. So that doesn't make any sense no matter which way you slice it. You would want to cast it as your bonus action. That's better than replacing one of your attacks anyway, if you want to use finger guns. So yeah, you'd replace like a Firebolt, a Ray of Frost, a Toll the Dead, I guess, as one of you would replace one of your attacks with one of those. Or if you get stuck in melee, hit him with a Booming Blade with a melee weapon. Hopefully you got a melee weapon you can use with that. So this one is unfortunately a little bit awkward on this specific subclass combination because of how, you're a ranged attacker, and all of the really good cantrips to replace one of your attacks with are blade cantrips, which are melee attacks or attacks with melee weapons specifically. All right, so let's move on. Let's move on to level 10. You have this feature called Counter-Mage. Your experience in combating spellcasters grants you the following benefits. Abjuration Breaker. Whenever you make a ranged attack roll, you temporarily disrupt protective magic affecting the target for the duration of the attack. The effects of spells targeting the creature, such as Mage Armor, as well as properties and powers of magic items worn or carried by the creature, are suppressed and don't function. It says effects of spells targeting the creature, such as Mage Armor. I feel like there's maybe a word missing there that said the effects of abjuration spells targeting the creature, such as Mage Armor. But I think that's what it's saying. It's anything that's like defensive. Now it's called abjuration, but there's nothing in the description that says it's limited to abjuration. So it's up to your DM, I guess, to interpret. Does that mean just abjuration spells affecting the target, or any defensive spell affecting the target? Because like Stone Skin is a defensive spell, but that's transmutation. I'll reach out to Mike, the lead designer of Valda, see if I can get an answer from him on what the intention was there. And so that also applies to magic items worn or carried by the creature. So if they have like magic armor, apparently the magic of the armor would be suppressed. If they have bracers of defense, if they have cloak of protection, ring of protection, presumably all of those would be suppressed for this attack. And it just says the powers of magic items worn or carried are suppressed. So I guess that means if you impose a saving throw, then the saving throw benefits of all those magic items also wouldn't apply to the attack, right? If you hit them and, I don't know, your range attack is something that can topple. Yeah, you make a range attack roll with a trident. Trident is a melee weapon, but if you throw it, it's a range attack with a melee weapon. You hit them with that. The trident has the topple mastery, and you do get weapon masteries. So you could cause them, you would hit, and then also cause them to make a saving throw. And if they make that saving throw versus topple, then none of their saving throw bonuses from magic items would apply either. So just, I guess, anything that might help them against this attack or anything the attack does would not function. The target of the attack can't take a reaction to cast spells such as shield in response to the attack or damage as well. So that's kind of broadly worded as well. I presumably that also means like absorb elements or anything like that. Yeah. I wish they had provided just a little more guidance rather than simply saying such as shield or such as mage armor. All right, then we have anti-magic shot. When you score a critical hit and the target is affected by your gut shot feature, so let's scroll down to the gut shot feature, which is your level 5 feature from your base class. Okay. It also impedes the target's ability to cast spells. While the projectile is lodged in the target, it can't cast spells or take the magic action. Additionally, the target has disadvantage on Constitution saving throws it makes to maintain concentration. So what Gutshot does by default is whenever you score a critical hit against a large or smaller creature with a range attack using a weapon, the projectile lodges itself in the target for 1 minute or until the target replaces one of its attacks with dislodging the projectile. Its speed is halved and it has a disadvantage on attack rolls. So that is a 1 minute debuff. And it says when you score a critical hit, you might be thinking, well, that's so rare that maybe that's not going to be very good. The Gunslinger has a boost to their critical hit range, right? So at level 2, they get this feature called Critical Shot, which is your attack rolls with ranged weapons specifically. It has to be a ranged weapon, not just a ranged attack roll. So the trident wouldn't work because that is a melee weapon, and this specifically says ranged weapons, not just ranged attack rolls. Can score a critical hit on a roll of 19 or 20 on the D20, and at level 9 it goes to 18 to 20, and at level 17 it's 17 to 20. So they have a really big crit range. So that makes Gutshot a lot better than you might think. Now it is limited to large or smaller creatures, so huge-sized creatures and gargantuan-sized creatures are immune to this feature. But that's still a lot of creatures. And it's a 1-minute debuff. Now they could spend one of their attacks if they have multi-attack, or if they don't have multi-attack, they don't have to be their whole action to dislodge it. Making them waste their action to dislodge it is pretty good. Even making them lose one attack is still decent, right? I mean, this costs you nothing. It's just an add-on rider effect when you crit, and you like critting anyway. So this is a pretty good feature. And until they remove it, they have disadvantage. Their speed is halved, and they have disadvantage on attack rolls, right? So that's the base Gutshot. So what this feature does is they can't cast spells or take the magic action while under the effect of this feature. So now we're adding additional riders on top of that rider effect. Can't cast spells or take the magic action. Additionally, the target has disadvantage on Constitution saving throws to maintain concentration. So they couldn't cast more spells, but they have a spell going. It doesn't cancel the spell that's going, except that it makes them have disadvantage on the saving throw to maintain concentration, right? And you just hit them with a crit, which means the damage is going to be higher, and the DC of a Constitution saving throw to maintain concentration is based on the damage you deal. So you're going to do more damage. They're going to have disadvantage on saving throw. There's a good chance you're going to break their concentration when you do this because of the disadvantage on top of everything else going on. So that's a strong feature. Like, both of these are strong features against spellcasters, and they sound really strong, but it might be because you're thinking about in terms of, or the context of, a player character. Player characters have lots of magic items. They have lots of spells often, right? And bypassing all of those with a feature like this would be strong. But you're not really designed, like, player characters are not really designed to fight against other player characters. You're designed to fight against monsters. And most monsters do not have magic items, and most monsters don't have spells, right? It's like 25% of monsters have spells now. But that's just spellcasting in general, right? The number of monsters that have mage armor and shield is even lower. So these are strong, maybe against 10% of monsters out there, 5%, somewhere between 5 and 10% of monsters out there. So these are situational, but when they come up, they're very strong. Then we have one other feature, which is inured to magic. When you fail a saving throw against a spell or magical effect, you can take a reaction to roll a 1d6 and add it to the roll, potentially turning the failure into a success. So you're not like getting magic resistance, which would normally just say against any spell or magical effect, you have advantage on the saving throw. If you have spell resistance, it would just say you have advantage on the saving throw against spells, not magical effects. So this is neither of those things. So if you also have advantage on the saving throw, you can also add this on top of that. It takes your reaction and you add a d6 to it. It's just a flat d6. I think it's a little bit interesting that it's not adding your risk dice size to it. That would have been cool, and like a way to tie back to the base class, and in such a way as to not cause additional cognitive load with causing the player to have to remember 2 different die sizes being used. This one's always a d6, and your risk die is always greater than a d6. But that's not terrible. It's just, not any one of these things like that is too much complexity. It's like an accumulation of a bunch of things that do that causes too much complexity. And I don't think this one is highly complex. So I think it's okay. And it has no limited use. Like, you can do that as often as you want. It just takes your reaction. So I'm okay with that, because there's always this, you always have to engage in this like thoughtful tactical decision, right? Do I spend my reaction? I'm going to roll a d6. It may not be enough to help me anyway. And if it doesn't help me, I still failed the saving throw and I still lost my reaction. Like, that's a meaningful decision. Okay. You can't guarantee you're going to succeed. And so I think that makes this still pretty interesting and useful. I don't think this is overly powered. Like, again, how often are monsters using spells and magical effects against you? Not that often, maybe 25% of the time. Right, 25% of monsters are spellcasters, but even the ones that have spellcasting are not using magical effects against you. And effect only qualifies as magical if it is a spell, completely replicates a spell, or uses the word magic in the title or the description. That's how it's defined. So it's actually not that many features. Like, Dragon's Breath is not magical because it doesn't say magic in the title of Dragon's Breath, and it's not described in the text of Dragon's Breath as magical in any way. Like, magic or magical, it has to have the MAGCGIC letters together, magic, somewhere in the text, and then it qualifies as magical. If it doesn't, then it doesn't count. Now, some other DMs might stretch those definitions, and I think that's fine too. Anyone that's like where they took those stat blocks, like, and I do that myself, right? So any stat block where the in 5e the monster was using a cantrip, and now they've replaced it with not a cantrip, they just call it a straight attack, and they call it like Arcane Blast or something like that. I think that's what the mage does, Arcane Blast. And it makes they can either make it a melee attack or a ranged attack, things like that. They did that to simplify things for the DM. And they don't say, it doesn't replicate a spell exactly. It doesn't describe it as magical, but as far as I'm concerned, the intention was they only changed it from a cantrip to that to make it just a little easier for the DMs to use. So there's not like the DM doesn't have to like look up how this cantrip works. They've just got that whole attack written for them right there. So I still count those as qualifying as spells as far as I'm concerned. So hopefully your DM would do something like that as well, so that you can use these a little more often, although those are attack rolls, usually not saving throws. So this wouldn't help against an attack roll, but yeah. All right, then level 14, we get our whole feature is a new maneuver, right? So this is using our feature from level 2 called Risk, which uses the Risk dice. We get these Risk maneuvers, and they all have, a saving throw based on our dexterity and proficiency bonus. So I'll scroll down to the maneuvers. These are the maneuvers that you get from your base class. So there are 6 from the base class, and now you would have 7 because you're adding one more to your base class, or one more maneuver to your list of maneuvers. And you just know all of these. You don't have to like learn them over time. So the Spellslinger's new magic bullet maneuver is when you make a spell attack roll, you can expend 1 risk die as a bonus action to substitute the spell attack with a range attack using a weapon. Add the risk die to the attack roll. On a hit, the attack deals the weapon's normal damage in addition to the effects of the spell attack roll. So this one I found was a little bit confusing, but let's parse it out. It's not as like the wording I think is a little confusing. I don't know if there's an easier way to word this. There may or may not be, but once you understand how it works, once you wrap your head around it, it's not that complex. All right. So what they're saying is you're making a spell attack roll. So let's say you cast Scorching Ray, right? Scorching Ray makes 3 ray attacks. Each one is its own spell attack. You can replace one of those with a range attack. It's going to cost you a risk die, right? Because you're using a maneuver, and it's going to cost you your bonus action. So you used your action to cast Scorching Ray. You're now expending a risk die and your bonus action to replace one of those Scorching Ray attacks with a range attack using your weapon. Replacing the spell attack with your range attack is probably a net win because you would use your dexterity modifier for your ranged weapon, which is probably higher than your intelligence modifier, and you'd use your intelligence modifier for your spell attack rolls. So going to a range attack is probably a net win. Then you add the risk die to the attack roll. So at level 14, the risk die is a D10. Yeah, I don't think it upgrades to a D12 until level 15 or 16. Might be 18. I think it's 18, actually. All right, so it's a D10 right now. So you're going to roll the D10 and add it to the attack roll. So not only are you using your dexterity modifier instead of your intelligence modifier, which is probably higher, you're adding a D10 to it, greatly increasing the chance that that's going to hit. And then if it does hit, the attack deals the weapon's normal damage, like whatever damage it would have done as if you'd hit them with the attack. Now, it does say the weapon's normal damage. So if you like multi-classed a rogue or anything like that, this specific wording seems to exclude sneak attack. So it's the weapon's normal damage, which would be, whatever the damage dice of the weapon is, plus your dexterity modifier and any magical dice damage effects that are part of the weapon. So if it's a longbow +2, you would add the +2 to it. And of course, the +2 would add to the attack roll because it says you make the attack roll with the ranged weapon. So if it's a vicious weapon, then you would add the 2d6 to it, things like that. But it has to be part of the weapon or your ability score modifier. I think would all apply here to the weapon's normal damage. Anything that is not part of the weapon, like a smite, a hail of thorns, or a sneak attack, all of those are not part of the weapon. So those would be excluded because it says the attack deals the weapon's normal damage, in addition to the effects of the spell attack roll. Okay, so you're not giving up the spell attack, right? So if you did this with Scorching Ray, it would still deal the damage of the Scorching Ray. You don't roll separately for the Scorching Ray. It's just making the range attack roll. If you hit, you deal the weapon's damage plus the Scorching Ray's damage of 2d6 fire damage. So that's interesting and pretty cool, except there are not very many spells that use attack rolls. There's like Scorching Ray, Spellfire Flare, Melf's Acid Arrow. Yeah. I think, from the WotC content, I think that's it. Now, there's a bunch of cantrips that make spell attack rolls, so you could be doing this to add to a cantrip, and you could use your level 6 feature to replace one of your attacks with a cantrip. So you would make a firebolt attack. So you're going to take the regular attack action, replace one of those attacks with a firebolt, then replace that firebolt using your bonus action and a risk die with this. So now that one attack is going to deal both the damage of a firebolt and the weapon itself. And at level 14, firebolt is 3d10. So you're going through all this rigmarole, and essentially what you're doing is adding 3d10 fire damage to one of your attacks you would have made anyway. So you'll make 2 attacks with your gun, whatever it is, your bow, your crossbow. You'll just make your 2 attacks regularly, and one of those, whichever one you declare is the one that you're using this magic bullet on, that one would add whatever the effects of whatever the cantrip is that you're using with it. So 3d10 from a firebolt or 3d6 from a ray of frost, but then it adds the slowing effect on top of that, which if you also have the slow mastery, you could slow them twice in one round doing that, which is pretty cool. I mean, that's probably the way I would use this. I don't know that I would use my action to cast Spellfire Flare and then try to add, a ranged weapon attacks damage to one attack of Spellfire Flare or Scorching Ray. You're a 1/3 caster. You don't have the spell slots to do that. And you're a martial. So your regular attacks with your attack action are probably going to be stronger than you trying to cast Spellfire Flare or Scorching Ray with your limited spell slots. So so I think the right way to use this is you replace one of those attacks. You take the regular attack action, you replace one of those attacks with a cantrip that has to make a spell attack roll specifically. So Firebolt, Ray of Frost would work. It doesn't say a ranged spell attack. Yeah, it has to be a spell attack roll, not a ranged spell attack. So Chill Touch would technically work. Shocking Grasp would work. Toll the Dead would not work because that's a saving throw. And then you make your ranged attack normally with your weapon and add the effects of that cantrip if it hits, which is a pretty good chance because you're adding a 1d10 to the attack roll plus just making a regular attack with a weapon using your best ability score, which is dexterity. And you're adding the effects of the cantrip to that one attack. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of how you're getting around the whole there aren't any blade cantrips for ranged attacks. So this essentially turns one of your attacks into a ranged blade cantrip attack. Yeah. I mean, I said range, but there's nothing here that says it has to be arranged. I mean, all right, there is something here. You have to replace the spell attack of this cantrip with a ranged attack using your weapon. But if you have sharpshooter, I was thinking spell sniper, sharpshooter, then you can still do that in melee and then use it with Chill Touch, use it with Shocking Grasp, anything like that. All right. So, I think it's pretty good. There's the level 3 feature, the finger guns. That's more of a ribbon and doesn't really do anything, unfortunately. I don't think that's worth expending your risk dice on that. The level 6 feature, that's pretty good. It doesn't get great until you get Magic Bullet at level 14. Your Counter-Mage at level 10 is pretty good. All these features are okay, not great, but this is still a really strong subclass because you have Spellcasting, right? You're just adding Spellcasting on top of the Gunslinger base class, and the Gunslinger base class has a lot of good things going for it. It's only really an A as a ranged attacker. And I think that's kind of the unfortunate part of the Gunslinger class is that it's just one-dimensional. You can't really build it in ways to make it good at anything else. Yeah. But let's rank this subclass. The Spellslinger is going to be an A overall and an A for a 3-level dip. It's going to be an A for range attacker. And then basically all of these other ratings mostly are coming from the spells. So I'm not going to read through all those because that's just, you're a 1/3 spellcaster and 1/3 of a 1/3 caster using the wizard spell list just kind of adds all of that, right? Because you have access to all kinds of spells. And just adding all those spells to a martial is a very powerful thing to do. So I think I'd say this is better than the Pistolero subclass. Now, I've only covered those 2 subclasses for the Gunslinger. I think this one's a lot better than the Pistolero. Yeah, I would say so. But that's because you have spellcasting, right? Which is really good. There's a little bit more survival being added here because of the features of the Spellslinger. I would have given this like I don't know, maybe a B and at survival if it didn't have the Spellslinger features, because I just don't know that you're getting enough. You have enough spell slots to really get an A survival from the 1/3 spellcasting you're getting. And here it is in context with everything else. So you can see the Gunslinger and its ratings. I'm also highlighting the base class. And I just wanted to point out and reiterate that the ratings I give the subclasses do not already have the base class ratings aggregated and accumulated in those. They're separate. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's, multi-classing and other things. I can't foresee exactly what you're going to do with your build and how you're going to put all these things together. So I keep them separate. And the idea would be that you add them together, but unfortunately, things don't aggregate straightforward like they do in math. Like 2 + 2 is 4, right? Things just add together in math. That is not how these things work in D&D. For example, if you had a feature that said you have 60-foot dark vision and another feature that said you had 30-foot dark vision, those don't automatically add together to give you 90 feet. You would still just have the 60 feet, unless one of the features specifically says it adds to the other. And some of them do, most of them don't. And so in that case, you would say, in the case where they don't, you would say, well, those don't add, and therefore you don't have a net gain. If it does say that they add, then you do have a net gain. So yeah, that's why these things, like, they don't add together like you'd hope. So when I do like a build or something like that, where I put it all together and add everything together, it doesn't necessarily come out where, oh, an A plus an A means an S. No. Yeah. In this case, a lot of your features from your subclass, where you have your strongest roll feature is the range attacker. That does, I don't know if that I guess that's a good point. With the Gunslinger base class, I don't know that it adds together to give you a net gain, because it's still like all of the things that are adding to your ranged attack damage are expending your risk die, and you could be expending those risk die on other things that add to your range attack damage. So it's just a different way to spend your risk die to do range damage. It's not a net increase. I guess it's a good example of where these things don't add together like you'd expect. So you're still going to be an A ranged attacker, but with more options. And with a 1/3 spellcasting, you're going to have a lot more options. So I'm going to highlight the Pistolero which is the other subclass for the Gunslinger that I've covered so far, and that one's also an A. So all three of these, the base class and both subclasses, are all A's, and they're all A's at range attack rolls. So far we're like completely one-dimensional on the Gunslinger, which I think, it would have been nice to have other things, to have other ways for you to be able to lean into this. But it's a Gunslinger. Guns are ranged weapons. I don't know what else you would have done to diversify this. The one thing I'll say about the Spellslinger, though, is I think this is a missed opportunity, right? There is nothing about the Gunslinger base class that says you should choose favor intelligence over any other of the mental stats, wisdom or charisma. And so this would have been an opportunity, instead of doing the same 1/3 spellcaster, like the Eldritch Knight and the Arcane Trickster, and like many of the partner 1/3 spellcasters are all intelligence wizard wizard spell list. This would have been an interesting opportunity to go charisma sorcerer, right? I think that would have been a better fit for a Gunslinger. Gunslingers seem to be, thematically more about charisma than intelligence, in my opinion. And this would have been a cool way to differentiate this from the Eldritch Knight and the Arcane Trickster even more. So that feels like a missed opportunity as well. But this one's good. It's a solid A. I think you'll have fun with it. If you like the idea and the fantasy of playing with a Spellslinger or a Gunslinger and magic, being a little bit of a gish with that, this is going to be awesome for you. So even though, like, I think everything that I've covered anywhere, including WotC stuff, there's always opportunities for improvement. So I may call those out. That doesn't mean that these things are bad. So this is good. It'll be solid. You'll have fun as long as you're looking for that kind of fantasy. Okay, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. I hope it helped. If you don't have enough D&D in your life, remember, you can check the video description. There's a link to join my Discord, just a community of people who love talking about D&D. There is a link to Caius's monster data that I reference regularly about, how many monsters are resistant or immune to different things. There's a link to my DSR rules document, Google Doc, that has the rulings, the homebrew stuff that I do, the here's how I run and make these things work together kind of stuff, which I don't really consider homebrew. I consider it more like fixing stuff that's already part of the game to just make it work well together, like bastions and downtime and crafting. That's probably like the biggest part of it. And factions, those 4 things are probably the biggest part of that. And finally, there's a link to the Google Drive that has all of these Google Sheets in it that have all these ratings in there. And all those things have no paywall. You can just access them directly. Just go to that link and use it. That's why I created it. They are meant as community resources to help people get into D&D easier, to get into having fun and playing D&D and spending less time building characters. unless that's what you enjoy doing, right? A lot of us do enjoy making characters. There's a limit though on how many times, like how much time you want to spend building a character versus actually playing D&D, right? So yeah, this is meant to help. So I hope they do help. Yeah, there is a link to join my Patreon as well. And a big shout out to all my Patreon members. Thank you all so much, especially the frontliners and the Artificer tier Patreons. You guys are awesome. I appreciate you. I couldn't do this without you. So thank you. And, big thanks to everyone who chooses to support in that way. And if it doesn't make sense for you to support in that way, then that's okay. Don't worry about it. Just like, subscribe, commenting, and watching videos is a great way to support. So thank you for any way that you choose to support. You're awesome. And finally, remember that D&D is a game. Yeah, the point of it is to have fun with your friends. So please be cool when you play D&D, all right? Okay, catch you next time.